Well, welcome back to the channel, everyone. Today we're up investigating a local mining camp and mine where there's some local controversy about this one, and we're going to investigate whether the old white miners actually buried 100 Chinese miners alive. Now, the site we're at today is called Lily White, and this is an old mining camp, and how it got its name was the original owner of the mine and mining camp named it after his wife, Lily White. So that's how it got its name. Now, where the controversy comes in about this mine was supposedly, according to local history and lore and legend, that when the mine started to play out, that the white miners that owned the mine supposedly took their Chinese labor that they had hired, ran it back into the back of the adit or tunnel, and then blew the entrance shut and just left them. Now, that's the legend. I'd heard it as a kid. That's the way it happened. Now, I'm not sure if that was a local legend that got passed down from generation to generation that I heard, or it was from the sign that the Forest Service had posted out along the road that, I don't know, they probably put that there in the 40s, 50s, 60s. I'm not sure where or when that sign originated, but that story got obviously propagated through that sign sitting out there right on a main road, telling about this old legend of these guys that had been buried alive. We'll dig into more of that later. What about this mining camp itself? Well, as you can see, there's not a lot left of the camp. There's a few buildings up here. It's now a Forest Service guard station, Lily White guard station, and they use it off and on for fire training. They may put some folks out here to camp for a few nights while they're on fire watch, things like that. Or if they've got a crew out here working, they could stay here, though. The buildings kind of look like they might be a little rat infested right now. But the one good thing about this site is they got a really nice spring here. It's got nice ice cold water at it, and it's really good tasting water. So anytime we're up in this area, we'll always stop and fill up our water jugs here at the spring. And I think the spring was here back when the miners were here too. That's probably one of the original reasons why they formed a camp here. Now, supposedly, this mining camp had around 1,000 inhabitants. I find that a little overestimated. I would guess maybe 200 to 300 at the most. There might have been a few days of the year, there might have been 1,000 people here, but I don't think they had 1,000 full-time inhabitants here. There's really not much to indicate that there was that many buildings up here at any point in time. And looking at all the old newspaper articles that I can find about this place, there really doesn't seem to be that much evidence that this was that big. But that's pretty typical of the information that was spread around, that it seems to grow as time goes by of how many people lived in certain spots. Like supposedly there's a town, old town site, ghost town, not too far from here called Sparta. I've seen estimates that there was 5,000 people that lived there. I don't think there's any way imaginable there was 5,000 people that ever lived there. But that's just the way some of these local stories and legends wind up being a little bit overblown. Like I said, this was a center for a lot of the mining around this area. It was right on the road that went to Cornucopia. It was also right here's where the trail split to go up to Eagleton, which was another little mining enclave up Eagle Creek. And there was some mining up in the Eagle Creek area. Not a lot of large scale mining, but there was a fair amount of mining. There was a little boom here at one time, and so this was kind of a hub location because the road split to Sparta, Cornucopia, and Eagleton from right here. And Sanger is not too far away either. The road actually passed through Sanger to come to here. So it was kind of a hub location. So like I said, maybe at some point there might have been 1,000 people here on a certain day, but I kind of highly doubt that even. Unfortunately, I have not been able to find any pictures of the old town site or the mine or anything else about this place. There's very little in old newspapers about this place. There's a little bit in the local newspaper, and a little bit out of newspaper out of Union, because this was at one time part of Union County. But there's not a terrible amount written about this place, and there's not a terrible amount of history about it. I think right up above us here is the old mine site. We're going to go look at that in just a minute. And for you guys that are members of the Choice Ham group of membership, there'll be another little bonus section that only you guys will be able to see, where we'll go investigate another mine that's really close by. And I just happened to stumble across a tad bit of information about that mine, that maybe that's where those 100 miners are buried. But we'll save that for you guys that are on the Choice Ham membership. You'll see that one shortly after this video. But we'll go up here in just a minute and investigate the old mine site. Now, I'm going to jump into some geology stuff here real quick. I know some of you guys don't really care, but this area right in here is kind of interesting just because of the geology that we've got working with us here. Right here, and on the hillside behind me back here, is some exposed old country rock that's a little bit of argillite, a little bit of limestone in there, a little bit of everything mixed in on this hill behind me. And the hill over to the other side, I guess that would be to the south of the old town site, there's a little bit exposed there too. If we go to the west, any distance at all, just maybe a quarter to a half mile, we're into basalts. And the reason that's important around here was the Columbia River basalt flow that covered most of this area also covered up the old geology that had the mineralization in it. So there could be tons of gold, copper, silver buried underneath. In fact, there most likely is underneath all that basalt. So just to that side of us, the northwest of us, just tons of the hills covered in basalt. So we really don't know what's underneath that. The old timers, I don't think, as far as I could tell, I've walked around there quite a bit, they never really probed underneath that. And a lot of this geology up here is kind of a block faulting type geology. So even if they dug underneath of it, it may have a big fault where that area is sank down, and so it's like 500 feet of basalt. So those Columbia River basalt flows post-date all the other geology in this area besides the topsoil. And the reason that's important is it covered up so much of the old geology that had all that mineralization in it from the faulting and hydrothermic fluids coming up in there and forming the veins. Well, a lot of it got covered up. Now in areas like this here, it's eroded away, or it may have been a little thinner in this area to begin with and it was easier for it to erode away. So that's the reason we have some exposure here of ground that's possibly mineable. Now, like I said, we get to the west of us very far, we get back into basalt, and then you go just a little further to the west, you'll wind up at the Sanger mine, and that's another area. All around it, it's basalt, but there's an area there that's exposed where they were able to find some good veins that they worked. So that's what we're working with here as well. It was just a small little area that was exposed. For the longest time, before I really looked at this, I couldn't figure out what in the world, why are they talking about mining here? Because if you just drive through, you mainly see the basalt. You don't really, unless you're really paying attention, you don't notice there's other country rock exposed here. And just down the draw, when I was looking for the mill site, I found a big outcropping of limestone, surrounded by basalt, but there's one area that's eroded away, and here's this nice outcropping of limestone right in that area. So let's talk about the mill real quick. Supposedly there was a 10-stamp mill here. The only thing I could find in newspapers was a couple articles that mentioned that they were going to install a stamp mill here. The owner of the mine was kind of trying to get investors involved to establish the stamp mills. And like I said, it was supposedly a 10-stamp mill. Where it was at up here, I have no idea. I've wandered around up here, not a ton, but enough of the likely spots I would suspect there to be a stamp mill, and I just can't find any evidence of one. At least usually you'll find at least a concrete footings for the stamp mill, but I can't find any evidence of one. And usually they built them on a hillside. So gravity's your friend in mining, and I just can't find any evidence of one. I don't know if it actually got built or not. I found one other article where They mentioned one of the mines up Eagle Creek hauled their ore here to be milled, but I'm not sure it was at the stamp mill or what happened there. So that's a little bit of a mystery. If you happen to know where the stamp mill was up here, send me an email. I'd love to hear, or down in the comments, let me know where the stamp mill was up here, because I've wandered around a little bit and I have not been able to find it. So let's go on up and look at where where I think the original adit was for this mine, and we'll see if is that where they buried the Chinese miners. Up here kind of looks like an old tailing pile, so we'll go take a look at that. Seeing a little bit of quartz on the ground. Yeah, I would bet this is the waste rock pile. It's about where it indicated on a couple maps I found. This looks very, very similar to the ground you would find over in Sparta. Decomposed granite. Okay, so this was not an adit, this was actually a shaft. Which would kind of match the old stories that I heard, that they put them down a shaft and then blew it shut. Now, judging from the waste rock pile, I don't think this was a very deep shaft. Maybe 100 feet. That's kind of hard to tell. There could be some drifting going on underneath there. We'll look around here and see what other kind of workings they did. Big chunks of quartz there. I have never found a geologic report on this thing saying the dip or the direction of the strike. From what I'm seeing here, it looks like the strike is generally north and south, the way they've dug along here. And it must be at a nearly vertical dip. Now I know in the mid 80s, maybe up to early 90s, the Forest Service did some archaeology work in here trying to determine whether it was true that these guys were buried here, but they really couldn't find any evidence of it. They really couldn't find any really written evidence anywhere in the form of newspaper articles, or, of course, I don't think they would widely publicize that, but no written evidence anywhere that this actually happened. So I've heard stories that they excavated this and went back in and looked, but there might be an adit up in here somewhere that they excavated, but that definitely has not been excavated. That looks to me like it's just a collapse. And maybe some super expert could come along and tell you whether that was blown shut or just collapsed in. To me, this looks like it just collapsed in. Due to time, the timbering rotted, and it just collapsed back in on itself. Looking at some of this waste rock. You can see quartz running through the country rock. It looks like there's a mix of different kinds of country rock in here. I don't know if that shows up, but it's very orange stained rock or ground right there. Let's look over here and see if there's any more workings. It's hard for me to believe this just little bit of workings that are here would have called for a 10 stamp mill. Maybe they found enough that it kind of warranted it, but it makes you kind of wonder also whether it was one of the ploys the old miners used to get investors involved and get some money. So there's the main shaft right over there. A little pothole right here. I would imagine if you went out that way and dug, you would probably find that quartz vein out there too. Okay, so I haven't walked all that far, maybe 100 yards or so. I'm just looking at the geology here on the ground. We've went from the native country rock right over there to basalt right here. So obviously right in here this has been this hasn't been eroded enough to expose the country rock, but I'm still betting, unless there's a block fault or something here, that if you dug underneath this stuff you would find that quartz vein down in there. And I'm not seeing any other workings off this direction, so I think that's going to be about it this direction. We'll go up the draw and see what else we can find, but according to any map I could find, the workings we just seen were about it. The funny thing is about that map that I did find is it actually shows an adit instead of a shaft. You know, the topo maps, a shaft is kind of a square, an adit is usually two little arrows and then a line going out from them showing which direction the adit goes in. But I'm pretty sure that's what this showed, was an adit. That's kind of what I was expecting to see, but it's obviously not. And those old topo maps are not always right. There's a lot of mines. In fact, for the members, we're going to go look at another mine. Hopefully we can find it. And it's not on any map, but I found reference to it, and there should be at least some workings there, at least a shaft. So let's go up the draw and look and see what we can find. So I walked up the draw a little bit, looked around, really couldn't find much for workings up there. A couple little potholes where they dug some test holes, but really nothing to speak of. I took the drone up, flew around, I found this. This is just a gravel pit though. I drove up here and verified. It looked like a gravel pit from the air, and that's exactly what it is. At first, I thought this was a tailing pile over here, but it's just where they shove some of the topsoil off to get to this rock to use on the road. So the lily white story. Let's talk about this just a little bit and demystify a few things. One, I don't think there was ever $500,000 worth of gold taken from that little mine. If they did, at $20 an ounce, they must have hit one extremely rich pocket of gold there. And if they did, why didn't they continue working? So the $500,000 thing, I think, is completely irrelevant. They might have been $500,000 worth of ore or gold passed through Lily White at one time, but I don't think this little mine produced that much gold at all. The stamp mill, I took the drone up and flew around that area trying to figure out, maybe I missed it when I was walking around. I think, according to the old maps of where it shows the mill, I think the road that they built in later years for logging and access, I think probably covered the old mill site up from as near as I can tell. So there's that. Do I think 100 miners were buried at this mine? I don't think so. Were the white guys terrible to the Chinese at the time? Absolutely. Would I put it past some terrible old miner to do that? Probably not, because there's been other instances of massacres of Chinese miners. Do I think it happened at this mine? I don't think so. And let's go through the reasons real quick. One, in this area of Oregon, the Chinese weren't well known for working underground. There might have been a few here and there, and you know there's documented evidence that they did work some underground. Most of the underground miners were of European descent, but there were a number of Chinese miners. 100 at one location would be pretty rare. And for a mine this size, or the size of any of the mines surrounding this, would be even more rare. A lot of the bigger mines only ran 20 to 40 people in underground shifts. And most of those were Caucasian, European of some kind. So having 100 underground Chinese miners is kind of a stretch, I think. Two, I don't think you could fit 100 people in that small mine, any way, shape, or form. Maybe if you just threw them down in there, maybe. Now, there were a lot of Chinese miners, laborers in this area at one time. Baker had its own Chinatown. The Sparta Ditch, which goes right through this property, which I kind of think the mill that they had was, the water they used was off of the Sparta Ditch. I'm not 100% sure on that. But that Sparta Ditch was dug mainly with Chinese labor. They dug, I think, if I'm going off of strictly memory here, about 32 miles of ditch from way up here on Eagle Creek over to Sparta to do mining in just a little over a year and a half period. So that took a lot of Chinese labor to do that. There was probably at least 100 laborers doing that work. But as far as underground Chinese miners, probably not. Now, there was quite a few placer operations that used Chinese labor, and then later when the Caucasians went on to the next big strike, they left a lot of that ground and the Chinese came in and mined it, some of them fairly successfully. So, like I said, they were not treated the best in many cases, but at this particular mine, I don't think 100 of them were buried. So that's going to kind of wrap it up for the Lily White mine and camp. I'm sure there's a lot more history to this that's probably been lost. There's probably a lot of stories about this old mining camp. I can't even really find whether they had saloons or hotels or anything like that. There's just not a lot written about this place. I think it was one of those things that cropped up and then disappeared fairly quickly. Now, for those of you who are members of the Ham Choice level, there's going to be another video come out. We're going to go look at another mine that's kind of lost to history. I just happened to find it in some footnotes of some old mining reports. I wasn't even really sure where it was until I did a whole bunch of digging around and finally figured out where the claim actually was. And there was supposedly some underground workings. So maybe we'll solve the mystery of where those Chinese miners are buried. For everybody else, thanks for watching, and we'll see you guys on the next video. And thank you everybody for signing up for the membership. It really helps the channel out and helps us do more of these videos. Like I said, we're going to try and keep the mining videos posted for everybody to see eventually down the road, but for the members, they get to see them way before everybody else. And for the Choice Ham level, you get to see some extra stuff that we're not going to post anywhere else. So we'll see you next video.